I ended up phase reversing kick and snare to make my overheads work. I could have phase reversed the overheads, but I had to phase reverse the kick and snare to feel right against, particularly with the kick drum. Without phase reversed, it really didn't sound good at all. It was hollow, and we got all the power back, and also the length and that sense of that 6/8 swing that we've got. Hi everyone, welcome back to Greenroom. Again, we're doing a bit more of a deep dive now in our Mayor session, looking at the sort of unique part of this session. Aside from the preamps that we've discussed in the previous video, the main focus of this session was looking at different overhead positions with the same microphone. The hope here is that we can compare tonally. We don't have to worry about, sort of, what's a product of tone, what's a product of position. We're really focused on, we know that we've got the same performance from the microphone. All the things we talked about in the video about microphone preamps is the same with microphones. Microphones have a tonal colour, they have a transient response. There's all sorts of characteristics of a microphone that have implications on our recording. So we want to look at this, we want to minimise the mic as a contributing factor, and instead we wanted to focus on sort of different positions and see what they afford us, what affordances they give us by these different positions. So we're actually going to have a listen to a few of them. You'll be able to see the Pro Tools screen. We've got some mics here that are soloed. We've got a pseudo Recorderman pair that I mentioned previously, which are positioned the same distance from the snare drum, with the aim of really capturing a really strong, solid snare. Now, a true Recorderman is the same distance from the kick and also from the snare. This one is just measured from the snare, and the height is set based on what sounded great in the room. So again, you can vary your height depending on how much influence or space you want, how high your ceiling is. I really just like the sound of reflection from a ceiling back from cymbals. So if my ceiling is low, I'm going to keep my overheads low to keep the interaction with the roof as little as possible. Here we've got a high ceiling in Greenroom's live room. So actually we can place based on the kind of spatial balance, hard to say that, the spatial balance that we're looking for. So so we've got that pair there. One is placed basically focusing on the hi-hat and the rack tom and also the snare drum. The second one is placed then on sort of more behind the drummer, almost over the shoulder, concentrating on the floor tom. So it looks sort of halfway between a kind of Recorderman and a Glyn Johns at a height based on the sound that we wanted to achieve. We've got a middle and side pair, which is actually made up of a 414 capturing figure of 8 with a Calrec microphone as our sort of mono spot mic. Slightly different voicing on that one because of that Calrec mic. It might perhaps sound a little brighter, perhaps a little harder sounding. I think 414s actually have a relatively soft but clean presentation of audio. The Calrec's a little bit more forward, so there is a slight tonal variation there, but only very slight. We've also got an XY pair of microphones, which are placed kind of like that, if that makes any sense, right over the drummer, right over the top of the snare, capturing a sort of stereo spread of those. And then we've also got what I call room heads, which is a slightly spaced pair of 414s out in front of the drum kit. Again, trying to keep distances to the snare similar. To keep our image central, we want the snare to really feel in the middle. And again, I think it's really important when you place mics on a drum kit to think about where is the middle of a drum kit. I think you'll often see in live sound people placing them sort of left and right in front of a kit. And if you think about the lines running through a drum kit with your kick and your snare and your toms either side, then actually the centre line is quite at an angle across a drum kit. So think about your positioning based on where that goes. And of course, when you look at the video, we have the added complication of a left-handed drummer. So all of your natural placement angles that you're used to placing when you work with a left-handed drummer, you have to sort of turn your head around and realise, of course, that everything is rotated. So it's another little challenge. And actually in these recordings that you're going to hear, it's as a listener's perspective. So everything is the wrong way round from the point of view of traditional record production, where we produce our drums normally based on the presentation of a right-handed drummer. We've recorded a left-handed drummer, and I've left the microphones panned as the environment was. So we're representing what you'll see in the footage that was captured alongside this session. So what am I expecting from these mics? I'd quite like to set an expectation before we listen. So I'm going to set an expectation based on my previous experience of recording in these ways, but also just the nature of those mic positions and what we expect from those mic positions. And let's see, how this meets or doesn't meet the expectations of the recording. So the first pair, the sort of modified Recorderman, I'm expecting really strong snare. I'm expecting snare to be super solid. I'm expecting real detail in my cymbals. I find with this mic position, I get a very, very natural, detailed cymbal. I really feel like you can hear the stick on the cymbal. And if you've got beautiful cymbals, they will sound stunning. It will make terrible cymbals sound really bad. So again, you've got to remember, we're talking about, aren't we, 100% of the potential of the record starts before you hit record. If you have a bad instrument, you're in a bad position. And when I say a bad instrument, I mean an unsuitable instrument for that which you're going to record. If you want super trashy drums, then you really want a really super trashy drum kit and you're going to get that sound. I remember hearing Questlove playing pots and pans and thinking that sounds incredible. So again, we know that the musician is a massive factor in this. So assuming we've got those things the way that we want them, I would expect, as I say, these to give me a really solid snare and also incredibly solid toms. To me, this can be an overhead pair that can live with a kick drum and be done. There's no prizes for having as many microphones as you can on a drum kit. The prize is having the best sound for your record. And for some records, that's going to involve spot micing individual cymbals. If you're doing some of the heavier genres, metal type recordings, etc., where you're also triggering, you're going to need a really good, high quality, detailed close capture. This record, arguably, suits a slightly bigger, roomier, more natural drum kit as a single instrument sort of sound. And that's what I'm hoping to get from these. The other feature I find with this overhead pair is it often sounds drier than its position would suggest. So I often find, and again, can depend on the microphone, but it is relatively independent of the microphone choice, quite good focus in my image on this one. The second pair, the middle and side pair, this is one where we're going to listen to it based on a single balance, but you can influence this balance. You can EQ your side mics to create even more width. You can change the level of them. You can push the side mics higher. Eventually you'll start to hear audible phasing if you move your levels too much. But you effectively are manipulating the polar patterns of your microphones by varying the levels between your mid and your side. At the moment, the mid's pushed quite hard. We found with where we placed it that we needed to push the middle hard. Otherwise, it sounded super wide, like too wide. But the cool thing with middle and side is it gives me a lot of post-production choice. Does it sound natural? That's a whole other question. Does it matter? Depends on your record. We'll have a listen and see. The third pair is the XY pair, the pair that are just over our drummer, and they're what's called a coincident pair, which means that all of the information from our drum kit is arriving at both mics at the same time. This should give us excellent phase coherency. So we may find that we don't get a huge amount of width. It might feel quite sort of solid blob mono. The Recorderman one I'm hoping is going to give me bits of width but still be coherent. This one I'm expecting to be sort of flatter sounding. And again, my expectation is that this will probably be quite an unexciting presentation. I often find that kind of XY style of recording doesn't always lead to the most dynamic image presentation and performance excitement. But let's see, maybe we'll get a surprise on this one. And the last pair are the room heads, and I'm expecting these to be really balanced sounding, but to have much more room in them. So they're going to feel a bit more PA-like, a bit more in the space. But also, because they're a little further away from the kick, I'm expecting them to provide me with really, really, really good low end. Now, the tricky thing here is how are these going to interact with my closer mics? As it is with all of these things, and in fact, I had to phase reverse. I ended up phase reversing kick and snare to make my overheads work. I could have phase reversed the overheads, but I had to phase reverse the kick and snare to feel right against, particularly with the kick drum. With that phase reversed, it really didn't sound good at all. It was hollow, and we got all the power back, and also the length and that sense of that 6/8 swing that we've got. So let's have a listen, see what we think. I'm not going to put any close mics in at all on this session. As you can see, I'm just soloing the first pair, and again, just for anyone who's interested in Pro Tools, I've grouped these in their pairs. So there's a group for the 414s here, a group for this middle and side, a group for this pair here, which is our coincident, and a group for our room heads. And you can see those groups active in the left-hand group column. If you want to disable them, you click on it, and that will disable the group, or Shift-Command-G will also cancel any group activity in your session in case you're new to Pro Tools. And again, actually, just as a random aside, learn your Pro Tools shortcuts. You'll be amazed how much quicker you are in the studio and how much quicker you can get to concentrating on your record when you have maximum control over the tools that you're using. So by understanding how all this stuff sounds. By understanding how to use that room and how to use these software tools, you can get to the music much more efficiently, suffer much less frustration, and your artist feels in control. Your session will just run much more smoothly. Anyway, enough of that little aside, but I do think it's important. Let's have a listen to this first pair of overheads. So the first pair of overheads is our sort of modified Recorderman style pair of overheads. So already we can hear there, super solid snare drum. Feels like there's a close mic on the snare drum. We're still getting some room space. We're hearing the splash of the reverb. Kick sounds quite distant because, again, there's not really a focus on the kick on this one. But again, the cymbal work sounds really, really nice. Hi-hats are really crisp. And again, a really nice presentation of width on the cymbals there. It feels big, but doesn't feel overly separated. So let's move now to the mid-side pair, which you'll see 3 mics up there, because when we do the mid-side process, we have to do some work to create that mid-side. And again, we can talk about that another time around how you would go about that. Lots of information about how to achieve that process. But you'll see here, I've got a trim plugin, which is phase reversing what is a copied version of the side mic. So these two will cancel out perfectly, and then you drop this in, and we create our mid-side image from the combination of the 3 channels. And immediately, actually, we get a much sharper, snappier sound from that central placement of the mic array, and also the cowbox adding a bit of snap. But we get huge amounts of width. But again, more room sound because mid-side will sound further away. The polar pattern it creates gives a sense of being further away, but with that real sense of width from the side there, which we can pull that back and make the sound narrower. But it's a more aggressive sound, and I think a less natural sound, but potentially really exciting if we want width, snap and controllability in our drum recording. Let's now try our XY pair. I'm just going to flip back to the Recorderman for a second. So again, interestingly, even though there's not much difference in distance, the XY feels further away than the Recorderman. The Recorderman has that sense of closeness to it. But really interesting how the kick's now breathing and now feeling the sustain of that kick, but it feels more compact, feels narrower. So again, if you've got a track where you've got all sorts of stuff going on around it and you want focus in the middle, it could be fantastic. This is a very stripped out track. Blues guitar, bass, drums, a little bit of organ. So actually we probably want our drums to feel quite big. So in this case, we might prefer the Recorderman. Not that it's better, it's just more appropriate. And now let's try these room heads. Immediately, so much more power. Tons of power in those, but also more space because they are further away. Now you can really hear what that room sounds like. That's a very nice controlled balance of the dry and wet sound. Probably a bit too wet for the record, but you can imagine in certain records, or perhaps even you get a hit chorus, you can imagine being able to ride into these overheads in the chorus and then go into closer overheads on a verse, something like that. That's a creative production tool. But all the same mics, so it's the same mics, all 414s. We'll just spin back through those. So I have my favourite in there, and I'm interested to see if you have your favourite. Give them all a try. Try these things in the studio, and I say play not just with the position in terms of the physical type of overhead, but also always remember height, because you can hear how quickly the room becomes an influence when recording in a large drum room like the one we're recording in here. Hopefully that was useful, and that brings us to an end really of the analysis on this John Mayer track. I encourage you now to go away, listen to these drums, think about what choices you would make based on this, go away, try your own recordings, but even maybe start working on these sessions. Make a pick from these, and then track some guitar, track some bass, add some keys, find a vocalist. Just use these sessions to gain experience, to try things out, so that you too can start to create your own template sessions that add extra parts to this, and you can find out all the different routes that you might take in recording those other elements.